It's the Autosport podcast. We explain how Lewis Hamilton went from zero to hero, while Sebastian Vettel went the other way. 2 weeks ago, Sebastian Vettel won on Lewis Hamilton's home patch at Silverstone, but Hamilton returned the favour with an unlikely victory in the German Grand Prix to take the lead in the World Championship. And what a race it was. Absolutely amazing. I'm your host, Ed Straw, and joining me to work out exactly how Hamilton and Mercedes did it is F1 Racing's James Roberts. Now, James, first, have you recovered from the stress and the intensity of writing the Autosport.com and Motorsport.com immediate post-race report yet?
Well, I have indeed, because that was a tremendous race. My goodness, there was so much action. All day we were thinking, is the rain going to start falling? And finally, when it did come, there was cars spinning everywhere. There was controversies with the pit stops that we'll talk about in a minute, and race leader crashing out. And through it all came Lewis from the back of the grid. So what a day and what a Grand Prix.
That's why you're now relaxing with a glass of your chosen beverage in our fine palatial apartments near the track.
Well, this is a very pleasant environment to be doing this podcast with you this evening, Ed. Just a few hours after the end of the race, it has finally dried up now. But yes, we're in a residential village not far from the university town of Heidelberg, 15 minutes from the famed Hockenheim circuit. We're in the Rhine Valley, so it's a lovely part of the world, and what a great place to have a motor race.
Exactly, there's probably a slogan in that one, isn't there? It's always good to get a little travel log and reviews in that, because people certainly do enjoy that. Well, let's move on to the race without further ado. It was a big turnaround for Lewis Hamilton, wasn't it? Saturday, all had gone wrong. Starting 14th on the grid, a few hours after, he's winning the race. Amazing.
You almost question yourself, how on earth did he do it? Where did he produce that performance from? Because it is undoubtedly one of the best performances that we've seen from Lewis Hamilton. To go, as you said right at the start, Ed, for Vettel to win at Silverstone, and then for Lewis to do it, to get one over Seb here, it's extraordinary. Consider where Lewis was yesterday afternoon, and yesterday where his head was down. He had that problem with his car during qualifying, and then a very measured race in the early stages, slowly picking cars off all the way through. And then when the conditions changed and the grip levels were low, it was just classic Lewis, who was able to produce a performance that has taken him now into a 17-point lead in the World Championship. Quite an extraordinary day, really.
Well, it is amazing also if you just look at his demeanour. I mean, okay, Saturday was a bad day, Sunday was a great day, so of course there's a difference in his demeanour. But if you remember, when he had the problem in qualifying in Q1, he pulled over, helped push the car out of the way, and he kind of crouched down between the side pod and the front right wheel, had his arm resting on the car and his head on it, and he just looks absolutely disconsolate, just thinking, how can this happen? And he said after the race, you always go into the race hoping and praying for something to happen and that it might come to you. But, this is very rare. I think there have been 12 instances in World Championship history of drivers winning from 14th on the grid or lower. That's in, I think, 987 World Championship races. So just over 1% of the time. I think it's 1.25% of the time, something like that. So that tells you how unlikely it is if you're starting down in 14th to be able to come through and win the race. Great fortitude, I think, on his part to be able to recover.
Very much so, especially when you consider where he was yesterday. Last night I was looking at his Instagram story because he put a message out there, and there was a line in it that really struck me. He said, good or bad, I will die before I give in. And this little post, and he was talking about the problems that he had in qualifying. From talking to the Mercedes team this morning, I was just trying to do a little bit of investigative work to find out exactly what happened. And from what I understand, as he came into turn one, as he hit the curb, there's a slight vulnerability at the front of the Mercedes in the steering rack where the hydraulic pressure started to leak, just literally as a result of hitting this curb. We saw a similar thing in Austria. High curbs there, and that's what ultimately led to retirement. So what happened is when he hit the curb, the hydraulic fluid started pouring out. He lost power steering, and that's what took him much further left over the curb, and then you saw the damage there. And then halfway around the lap, he ran out of hydraulic pressure and had to stop the car. Extraordinary scenes of him then getting out of the car and trying to push it back to the pits, reminiscent of Alain Prost here, I think in '86 with the McLaren pushing the rear wing and then trying to drive it back. So so that's what happened to him yesterday. And then to see, there was a lot of talk about where was he, where was his mental state. But I just think, honestly, I think that in such a competitive World Championship title fight that he's in, and Mercedes are finding this as well, that they've got a real competitor with Ferrari this year. And it's become a real challenge to try and get on top of things. So they'll be delighted by the way of the result. I mean, midway through the race, it was a Ferrari 1-2, and then at the end of the race, you've got a Mercedes 1-2. Extraordinary turnaround.
It's exactly what we've almost come to expect from the championship this year. While it's generally required safety cars or adverse weather conditions, or both in the case of this one, to really cause some unpredictability in the races, the swings from race to race and the changes in momentum have been enormous. And I think that's one of the reasons why Lewis was maybe suffering and quite so down, because it's really intense. It's been intense from the very start of the season. This hasn't been one of those World Championships where, one driver pulls away and builds on a lead and sits on it, and then the other one can catch up, but they're not too worried. It feels like every single race, come the end of the year, you could look back and say, well, that race, there was that loss. And so in that context, a swing of 25 points in Hamilton's favour after such an unfavourable start is absolutely enormous, which is why he was so delighted with things. But looking at the race, he executed it extremely well. And yes, it required the rain coming to really create that opportunity. In fact, he was asked after the race when he realised it was really possible, and he made some noise about, well, you always hope, etc., etc., etc. But the moment when I really knew it was possible was when the rain finally came. And in fact, I was listening in on various drivers' radio feeds, and all the teams were telling drivers for about the first 40 minutes of the race, yep, it's going to rain in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 6 minutes. And I thought, this is going to be another one of those races
where it doesn't happen,
where the rain never comes. But of course, it does come about 10 minutes after the race when we're all in the paddock trying to find people and getting soaked. And
I think Lando Norris put on his Instagram story a great shot of you charging through the rain to the post-race press conference, which was very entertaining.
Yeah, I gave it a few minutes to ease off, and all it was doing was getting worse. So I just had to accept, you know what? I'm going to get soaked, because I wanted to get there and hear what the top three were going to have to say. But yeah, starting down in 14th place, he didn't actually make brilliant progress instantly off the line. He had to battle his way through. Lots of positions he was making up. Basically, the midfield aren't that worried about him, because there's no point in them spending a few more corners or a few laps bothering Lewis.
It's their race.
Exactly. All they'll do is lose time compared to the people they're really racing. It took him until lap 14. He took Kevin Magnussen to take 5th place, which moved him onto the back of the big three teams. Of course, Daniel Ricciardo having started down at the back, and he was trying to sort of haul his way up.
He was struggling much more on the medium tyre, wasn't he? He wasn't making anywhere near the progress that Lewis was on the soft.
Yeah, I think probably the tyre played a part in that, and also the fact the Red Bull hasn't got the same straight line speed. So yeah, it was hard work for Ricciardo, who kind of gradually hauled himself up the order, and he was, he managed to get to sort of the back of that group, not quite on it, but into a position where he'd have been the last of the big three drivers, had his car held out. But yeah, and that just sort of created this situation where Hamilton was trying to extend that stint as long as possible in the hope of hitting the rain, which we're all just praying for. It's brilliant when rain hits.
Oh
isn't it?
Yeah, terrific! It reminded me of that race here in 2000. Where it was raining only on one part of the circuit, but not on the other. And I can't remember precisely the details, but Mika pitted for wets and Felipe stayed. Anyway, I don't know why I'm rambling on about 2000. But I think what we should look at is the moment where Lewis came into the pits, or didn't come into the pits, as it happened. And then this was investigated. Charlie Whiting said that they wanted the storm, the thunder, the flood to clear, for it to all calm down, and then for the stewards to investigate it, and Lewis then talked them through exactly what happened. Now, I know, Ed, that first of all, we've got to say that I think the correct decision was made in that it was just a reprimand. I think it would have been criminal for all those people to have gone home and then when they turned on their television to find out that the winner wasn't Lewis Hamilton. So I think that was probably the sensible decision.
There is, of course, always the letter of the law argument there, and sometimes stewards get backed into corners on it because the stewards are told on the decisions that aren't judgments of fact, that kind of thing, they have to stand up to legal scrutiny, the decisions they make. So sometimes your hands can be tied, and there was a danger they could have done that. However, there is a wriggle room on this. I guess we should just remind everyone of the details of this. Obviously, Hamilton made his first stop under normal conditions. He was trying to stretch it to the rain, couldn't quite get there. Tyres were dead, as he put it, so they brought him in, and he was he would have been at the back of that group, so he was fifth, and then Verstappen rolled the dice as soon as the rain appeared because he thought if he'd get on intermediates, it didn't work, but it didn't cost him anything. He still finished fourth in the end. But then we'll come back to Vettel's crash shortly, but Vettel crashed, caused the safety car, and then it was, right, you don't have much time to decide because Vettel crashed at the Sachs curve, which is only a few corners round from the pit entry. So then you've got Bottas, who of course had passed Raikkonen, and then effectively Hamilton is the next car, and they're trying to work out what to do. And Hamilton was called into box by Pete Bonington, his race engineer.
Bottas stopped first.
Bottas led the way into the pits, and Hamilton was meant to follow him in.
Have tyres ready for him.
There was loads of chatter on the radio about what the tyres and our compound were to be, and that seemed to contribute to the confusion. So pick it up from the moment Hamilton crosses the white line dividing the rain track from the pit entry.
He peels into the pit, and then at the very last moment decides not to pit, and he crosses the white line. He's on the right hand side of the bollard, which is regulatory, but then he crosses the white line, goes over the grass and rejoins the track. And the reason he did that was because he saw that Kimi Raikkonen didn't pit, and he didn't want to lose track position to him. Now, in the midst of all that, there is extraordinary radio chatter that he's getting, mixed messages and signals from his race engineer Pete Bonington. And Ed, I think you've got a transcript precisely of what he said, and you've worked out how many times he said a particular word, haven't you?
Yes, so I've done some counting. Well, Hamilton gets told to box, so the normal box instruction that we're all so familiar with. So he pulls in, and then Hamilton says Kimi's staying out. So he spotted Raikkonen stayed out on track. At this point, Hamilton is thinking he wants to maybe stay out, but I think Hamilton was quite keen on staying out, but I think it was the radio communication confusion that created the window of opportunity for him to do it and sort of made him commit to staying out, because basically Hamilton says Kimi's staying out. There's all this other confusion going on the Mercedes radio channels, and Pete Bonington, his race engineer, appears to basically say, no, stay on, and then he just says in about it's more than a dozen times he says the word in. In. Exactly, and I get the feeling, it's always difficult to know exactly what's going on at that moment. What seems the more likely interpretation is that Hamilton said Kimi's staying out. Probably Pete Bonington thought, what does that mean? And probably, I think he's just trying to say, no, stick with what you're doing and come in. But he's ended up saying, sometimes people do use slightly the words, and he said, no, stay. And then he stumbles over it and says, stay again. And of course, if you hear the word stay, it means stay out. So whether Hamilton was already thinking about it and that pushed him over the edge, or whether that made him change, it all led to Hamilton driving across the grass and rejoining the track. And of course, that was actually the race-winning decision, because it's what gave him track position over Valtteri Bottas and Kimi Raikkonen and Max Verstappen, who was fourth in the run to the end. But then, of course, the investigation. Great drama.
So he's called to the stewards following the race, and Charlie Whiting then comes into the media centre, and there's a huge crowd around Charlie to try and work out what's going on. And he says, look, I can't tell you the decision because that's in the hands of the stewards. But
which is often not understood, actually, Charlie Whiting's role. He can flag things up, but he can't make the decisions or whatever. He's not actually part of that process. That's down to the four stewards, one of which, of course, was Mika Salo, who came close to winning a Grand Prix here for Ferrari when he was a stand-in.
Indeed. So Charlie was put in a difficult position, but all he said is, look, they can give him a reprimand, a ticking off, a 5-second penalty, and where did he finish? 4.8 seconds ahead of Valtteri Bottas. So
yes, the gap was about 4.7 rounded up. So
it would have dropped him behind Valtteri.
Exactly.
If it was a 5-second penalty.
Actually, Mercedes were telling Hamilton to keep pushing on. At one point, they said, right, Strat Mode 5, which is one of the, I don't know exactly the code to it, but Strat Mode 5 crops up when he's pressing on and sometimes turns up in qualifying. So that's a push on thing. And Hamilton says, well, I want to save my engine. And obviously the last thing they want to do is say, we think there might be an investigation into this, because it hadn't been mentioned at that time. So they don't want radio communication with them acknowledging it. They don't want to irritate Lewis with some stuff about it. So they're trying to get Hamilton to pull away, so that even if there is a penalty, because 5-second penalty is one of the more likely scenarios. The last time we saw a penalty for this, I think, was Baku in 2016, when Kimi crossed the pit entry line while racing with Ricciardo and then went back onto the track. It wasn't quite the same, but there was a 5-second penalty for that, and they were particularly hot on it there at Baku, because the pit entry, if you remember that year, was pretty bad. So the stewards are given this. There's no dispute that he did something that's not legal by the rules, is there? So then it comes down to what is the punishment.
Well, that's it. I just wanted to say is that one of the regulations says you cannot cross the white line on entering the pits. And as Charlie very carefully and correctly said, he didn't enter the pits. So he did cross that white line, but not in the way of entering the pits. And so is when you look at how rules are written. Anyway, I've got the steward's decision here in front of me, and he was basically given a reprimand, and it was based on a number of mitigating factors. And I think that the most important thing about this is safety. And they said that the driver and the team candidly admitted it was a mistake, and there was confusion about whether to stay in and out. So that was one of the mitigating factors.
There's no lack of evidence for that, certainly.
The fact that the infringement took place under a safety car period, so speeds are reduced, and there is, and then finally, and this I think was the important one, point 3, at no time was there any danger to any other competitor, and the change in direction was executed in a safe way, which, when you consider the Kimi one that you were talking about in Baku, arguably that was a safety concern.
Yeah, and I think all these situations are different, and I know there will be some Ferrari fans on social media going, well, look, Kimi got done for this a few years ago, Hamilton hasn't been done, and I think there are differences in these incidents. I think particularly Baku, there was a lot of talk the first year about the problem there. There's specific references to it. I had a look back in the 2016 race directors' notes that go out to all the teams, where they referred directly to the International Sporting Code regulation about
very high speed as well.
Yeah. Whereas actually here, this is kind of a normal pit lane, so they weren't quite so worried about it. But yeah, if it was green flag conditions, there was a chance of another car coming around the final corner in a collision or whatever, it might have been different. Ultimately, I do think you want common sense, do you? You don't want you don't want to change the race result unless there's a good, just reason for it. And in fact, my personal view is I tend to lean towards not having so many penalties in general. I think you could have argued, people will be saying, well, Mercedes should have been penalised and just favouring them. But actually, I would say, well, we've had recent Ferrari-Mercedes collisions on the first lap. I'd sort of lean towards saying, well, do you know what? They're racing in honest mistakes on opening laps and probably shouldn't be punished. Maybe you give some licence points. So if people keep making honest mistakes, they get something. But you want to try and minimise the penalties where possible. And I think it would have been a bit of a travesty for this to have undone. Imagine after we've had this great race everyone's talking about, and then after the race it's like, oh, actually, yeah, this has happened. So I've got no major problem with it. But it's interesting, though, that basically this was my interpretation of it was that Mercedes wanted him in, Hamilton was coming in, and because he heard what he heard, he bolted back out. So if that's the case, then Mercedes have kind of made a communication error and stumbled because there's so much going on and they've been a bit overloaded. And that's actually the correct strategy call to win in the race, which is a tremendous irony. I mean, to be honest, given the strategy problems they've had this year and the mistakes, okay, their own fault, but the team's been quite beleaguered on that. So you kind of think to them, well, do you know what? I guess we'll certainly on the Hamilton side, we'll let them have this one.
Wasn't it interesting after the safety car peeled in? when Valtteri Bottas had a real look at Lewis going into the turn 6 hairpin, didn't he? And then they drove almost wheel to wheel into the next corner. And I thought Valtteri was very sensible there. He didn't drift wide. He could have easily have tried to take that corner, and they could have tangled. And you could argue, look, team orders. Is there a place or isn't there a place? But perhaps perhaps Mercedes were sensible to say stop, hold positions. And Toto Wolff told us afterwards that he would have done exactly the same if it was Valtteri leading from Lewis and it was in that order. He said we would have told them stop because they need to recoup World Championship points. It's their home race. They needed a 1-2 finish, irrelevant of which drivers around it was. So probably, I think from a racing perspective, in such a crazy madcap race, I'd have to agree that Mercedes did the right thing to hold station for both cars.
It's difficult because everyone wants to see drivers racing, but at the same time, you do want to be careful about that kind of thing. Realistically speaking, Bottas had his best chance because overtaking was very, very difficult. Even evenly matched cars in that final part of the race, it wasn't easy to make the passes. When there's a big speed difference, it's been possible to do it. So that was always going to be Bottas' best chance. And I think I agree with you. If he'd been racing a Ferrari, maybe he'd have tried to hang on the inside of turn 7, push the driver wide. But there's a point where you can almost imagine the thinking going on as you're watching them coming down that little short run to the right-hander at turn 7, and Bottas is just enough there, and he's probably thinking, no. And Bottas is sensible about it because James Vowles came on the radio after and gave him the whole station instruction, and Bottas basically said, "Yeah, we'll do that." There was no chippiness about it. It was just kind of no, I'll do that. Which was good from Bottas' point of view because he's going to be kicking himself for the fact it's another race maybe he could have won, but because of safety car timing, this, that, and the other, it's gone wrong. Because of course he was leading the race when Vettel went off, having passed Raikkonen.
I appreciate that we haven't yet come round to Sebastian, one of the biggest moments of the race. But while we're still talking about team orders, isn't it funny that Hockenheim again has produced this team orders thing? And there was a moment in the race today when Kimi was leading, and on an alternate strategy, I think Seb had tyres that were 11 laps fresher than him.
Well, Kimi had made his stop early because once Hamilton had come through and passed Magnussen, he was pretty close to a pit window, so they thought, well, we better bring Raikkonen in so that he'll come out ahead of Hamilton. So it was an early stop, but it was forced by Hamilton arriving on the scene.
Forced by
and that's what got Raikkonen out of sync. They were probably thinking of a two-stopper at that stage, probably. But then it became clear extending it was viable, maybe.
And Sebastian was finding running behind Kimi that he was struggling. There was a number of lockups, wasn't there, that he had, and he was struggling to control the temperatures in his rears. And ultimately, the team. Go on.
At one stage, he described over the radio the situation as silly.
Well, it's silly season, and then he finally Jock Clear, a voice we don't hear on the radio very often. Engineering director at Ferrari came on and basically gave the order to Kimi to move over. Sebastian is faster than you. But I quite liked Kimi's belligerence. It's like, if you want me to make way for him, tell me, is that what you want me to do?
I think he's absolutely right. So actually, I was listening to a lot of Raikkonen's radio, and there's quite a lot of uncertain instructions given to Kimi. It's very, very bizarre. But personally, I understand why there was a period which rolled up to 2010 when we had the Massa-Alonso thing, the Fernando is faster than you messages from Rob Smedley, which led to Massa giving away victory, which actually would have come a year to the day since his horrendous accident in qualifying at the Hungaroring. So it was just this sort of perfect storm of terribleness. At that point, team orders were banned.
That's true, yes.
Now, this was a consequence of the fallout of the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix, where Barrichello had been ordered to let Schumacher past. He decided to do it coming out the last corner, and everyone was up in arms, and justifiably it made F1 it made a mockery of F1. It was not great. So they did this stupid ban of team orders. So then it was always, there's a braking problem, there's this. So they had to disguise it. Now, the 2010 Hockenheim thing showed it was a stupid rule that made no sense. So they unbanned it. But ever since then, people have had this thing about not doing it and pretending to do it. I remember one occasion when there was that Massa-Bottas argument with Williams in Malaysia, in 2014, because Massa didn't want to let Bottas past because Button was ahead of Massa. Massa couldn't do anything, and the team wanted Bottas to have a little bit of a go. And Massa was like, oh, I can't do this. And I remember Claire Williams at the next race said, it wasn't a team order, it was a team instruction. And I sort of thought, teams, it's a bit unfair to pick on one particular team, because loads of them do this, but that was just, for me, the most clear example of how everyone ties themselves in these semantic knots about it.
Yeah.
And so I think...
So they've quite an emotive issue, isn't
Exactly.
it?
I can't remember the exact wording, but Jock Clear basically said, do not hold Sebastian up, I think was the instruction. So Kimi knew what that meant, but... It's just like, come on, just say let him pass.
Yeah,
come on, it's understandable. I mean, Kimi, from a pure racing himself position, will be thinking, well, maybe I can extend these tyres to the end of the race, or it's going to rain anyway, and I'll regain track position. I'll be able to keep track position and stay in the lead. So yeah, if it's a pure individual race, of course he'll want to do that, and he'll do everything he can to kind of keep that. Vettel, obviously, out of sync, having done really well in the first part of the race. At one stage on the radio, he said, look, everything I built up in the first part of the race is being wasted here. So Vettel was annoyed. So it's a perfectly explainable situation. Good, simple, sensible move. You know, team orders are very emotive. People don't like them. I don't think anyone really likes them, but there is a time and a place for them and a reason for sometimes doing it. Because team orders does not necessarily mean you, James Roberts, will always finish second behind me going into the race. It could be one day it goes one way,
unless
one day
you, Ed Straw, had that contractually written into your agreement with the team in question.
This does sometimes happen, and of course I'm such a big deal. I would of course insist on number one status, and in fact I'd have right of veto over my teammates. So
well, indeed,
I'd never have a driver as slow as you alongside me. But
well, I do keep to the speed limits.
Yes,
in case the authorities are listening,
as we all do, as we all do. Not necessarily the right speed limits, but we do. So. Yeah, team orders, it's a bit annoying, but absolutely logical. You know, imagine if after turning everything around, a 1-2 for Mercedes on home soil, Bottas and Hamilton had collided and wiped each other out, which, let's remember, it's happened with Mercedes drivers before, and then suddenly they're thinking, we've done this great recovery with Hamilton, we've got a 1-2, and then suddenly they give victory to Kimi Räikkönen with an injudicious moment.
Now, come on, Ed, we must, as a former editor of F1 Racing used to tell us all the time, we must talk about Sebastian Vettel.
Well, who drove superbly
impeccably, flawless.
Much of the weekend.
Controlled it.
You know, great job in the first stint. When you're leading at the start, in the first stint, all you really need to do, well, all you do, the days of someone pulling as big a lead as they can, they're gone. That's not what you do. You normally you'll aim to build up maybe a 4-second lead, something like that. You want to be insulated from the undercut, where the car behind you stops earlier, and different tracks, different tyres, different conditions. The undercut can be worth different amounts of time. But, 4 seconds is quite a good target, because that gives you a bit of change in case a back marker gets in the way or something goes wrong. That's quite a nice thing. So Vettel built up his lead. Actually, he was about 5 seconds ahead when he finally made his pit stop. So first stint executed beautifully, and then the little kerfuffle with Kimi, and then he's leading.
A few lockups.
Yeah. There were a few. There was certainly one in particular into the hairpin that was reasonable, but he seemed to be doing all right. And when the rain came, he was doing fine. And in fact, it was Kimi who was struggling, because when
Kimi did struggle.
When the rain came, the gap, the gap for Vettel to Räikkönen was 3 seconds just under, and it quickly grew to 6.6 seconds, and Räikkönen got caught by Bottas. So things were going really well for Vettel. He had 9 seconds. So he didn't need to press on. And then the worst happened at the Sachs curve.
Wow, what can you say? There he comes into the stadium section. It's a very narrow part of the track. He comes in too quick, doesn't lock up, but it's just one of those really annoying shunts where you just sliver and you can just feel the car. Not that I've driven a Ferrari at the German Grand Prix and lost control of it, but you just know that as the car just understeers and there's nothing you can do about it, you can't turn, he's in the gravel, and then bang, he's into the wall, and you can see the frustration, you can see him banging his steering wheel. There was a shot of him kicking gravel. The first I was aware of it, because obviously the television pictures have a tiny delay as they're all being processed. And the first I was aware of it was sitting in the media centre, and I heard a roar, a noise coming from outside. And of course, we're behind the pits, and you've got that huge grandstand. And I thought, what's happened? And then it was just a second later, it cut to Sebastian in the rain, in the gravel. Extraordinary. I mean, we were trying to work out when we last remembered a driver leading a Grand Prix who went out through a mistake of his own making.
Yeah, certainly a race leader having what might be termed a single car accident is very, very rare. I need to look back in a little bit more detail, but even a really early look at our Forex database that our editor of Forex can come up with all the previous instances. And I think you may have to go back to, instances 2003 USA. Mark Webber briefly got into the lead in the Jaguar in rainy conditions, and he went off. But most of the instances of drivers retiring from the lead are engine problems, mechanical failures. We've had of course, the Spanish GP collision. So there've been those sorts of things. But just a driver in control of a race going off, it's so rare, and it was agonising if you watch the onboard, because he knows he's gone in too fast. He can't apply any more brake without having a big block up. And there's a little bit of locking up in the end, but the lock up wasn't the initial problem. So you sort of try and calm the car down. So you're trying to squeeze off as much speed as you can, as much brake as you dare. You can't put too much lock on, otherwise it's going to accentuate the problem. And so you're just hoping that you can just calm everything down and get to the edge of the track and just hope the front bites. And that's what he's trying to do, but it's nowhere near. And while he's trying to do that, then the rear briefly gave out, and it was just this long. He had plenty of time to think about it. Yeah. There'd have been that no. There was
a lot of swearing that went on between the moment he started running off the track and hit the wall.
But all credit to him for he went off, apologised to the team. He's made no attempt to make any ridiculous excuses. He knows he's about to win the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, which he's never done. He never won the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim. Hasn't won at this circuit since his F3 days. Big deal to him. He's pretty local. 28 kilometres from Heppenheim, his hometown. Yeah, and so it's just in a moment it's all gone. And in fact, that moment, I think it was like double-fisted 5 strikes of the steering wheel. It was just pure frustration, and I think that also reflects the fact that he knew he didn't need to do that. He wasn't having to push on. It was all under control and fine. He had a big lead, and it just went wrong. Very tricky conditions, admittedly, but. Extraordinary
moment. I mean, that'll be replayed. That's one of those moments that'll be replayed again and again and again. Sebastian Vettel in a Ferrari, crashing while leading in the rain at his home race, a race he's at a circuit he's never won at in Formula One. It's just mental.
And of course, if he loses the World Championship by anything within that margin, depending on what happens in the rest of the year, that's going to be going to say, well, if you hadn't done that, because that was purely on you. So that's why it'll hurt him. He's got a long way to go still, but it's a big deal, and it it's easy to criticise. It is a mistake on his part. So yeah, top level Grand Prix drivers are meant to deal with that. These mistakes do happen. Drivers do make them, but it's horrendous for him. It just happened at that moment. And the rest of the weekend have been so good. If the rain doesn't come, he wins the German Grand Prix quite happily. But it suddenly the season's turned on its head.
Yeah, extraordinary. But the one thing I might just say, I don't know how relevant this is, but this is another example of an old school circuit catching somebody out, because there is very little runoff there. There's gravel. I think at a modern circuit, you could have easily slid off, and other corners on this lap as well, the turn 6 hairpin, you could easily have slid off, carried on, and been able to resume. But at that particular corner, the Sachs curve, you slide off, you hit the gravel, you can't turn, and you hit the barrier. So it's a real example of where old school circuits still can bite, and that's what's so thrilling about old tracks. And do you know what? Can I just mention a little bit about Hockenheim and this weekend, because it's been 2 years since we've been here. There's a lot of speculation that this won't be on the calendar next year, which I think would be a real shame. I think this has proved to be such a great success, a sellout. They've had over 70,000 people. I don't know the exact figures. I haven't got those in front of me, but I'm sure we can find those out. But it's been a huge sellout. And I was chatting to somebody as I was leaving the track tonight, and they said that only 4 seats in that whole grandstand section hadn't been purchased and paid for. And it's really telling. And I was trying to work out, because the German Grand Prix hasn't had the success in recent years and in the years that Sebastian Vettel was winning for Red Bull. And I was trying to work out why. And I got the sense, speaking to a few locals, who said that the key thing for them, and you went to the campsites and you saw it, is there's so many Ferrari fans, and they are Schumacher Ferrari fans. And for them, finally, with Sebastian in a Ferrari, that he's taking on Schumacher's mantle, and he's slowly becoming their hero. But I think Schumacher has such a high status and a high place in this country that it's very, very difficult for any driver to try and emulate and to attract so much fandom as he did. But I think slowly now they can see that someone almost described him as like he's a prodigal son who's going through this process. So what I'm really hoping is that financially they've made such a success of this weekend and this race that it can be retained on the calendar, because I think it's the German Grand Prix is a classic race, and now with Vettel in a Ferrari, that hopefully this should be without doubt a place to come every year on the calendar. I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, of course it should do. And the bottom line is that holding Grand Prix on the existing commercial terms is not exactly great. You can have a very successful race. This is the exact problem Silverstone has. They have a race that's been getting mighty crowds in recent years over a long time. And fundamentally, you say, well, we put this race on, we get this number of people through the gate, great. But because of the amount you're having to pay for it, it's problematic. So I think the German Grand Prix future is all going to be tied in with the negotiations with Liberty Media. We've got lots of race promoters now pushing for a change of the model. So rather than paying these yearly fees with these enormous escalators that can hike the price up year after year, that people often, when signing the deal, people sign these long-term deals with these big percentage steps year on year, and they seem not to understand compound interest some of the time. So yeah, I think ultimately the German Grand Prix this year being a success thanks to Vettel gradually gaining ground, and also a big Dutch influx, lots of orange in the grandstands as well. It's kind of, you can hold the most successful event you want, but if the general terms don't evolve a little bit and become a bit more of a partnership rather than just F1 trying to take as much as it can out of the promoters, then until that changes, I think German Grand Prix is going to be in trouble. And of course, people will say, well, what about the Nürburgring? But that's in a fairly poor part of the country. There's not huge sums of money there to do it. So it's the same thing. It's a big problem. In fact, if memory serves, the last time the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim was regular, there were certainly periods where the local government underwrote the losses of the event, so they knew it would break even, which is good. But then there were problems with I forget the exact run of events. I think that was also on a 2-yearly basis at that stage, but I forget the exact history. But yeah, the German Grand Prix needs to be on the calendar.
I agree.
It's
French Grand Prix. I love this summer. I love this summer period. Really hot Europe continental weather, and you've got France, Silverstone, Hockenheim, and Budapest coming up later this week. I mean, they're brilliant, aren't they?
Most of them are. I've got to say the French Grand Prix, for all its history and the fact I was delighted it was back, Paul Ricard has got quite a lot of work to do, shall we say. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and hope next year we'll go back and all will be brilliantly organised. We shall see. But yeah, and ultimately, what difference would a Vettel win have made? He'd have got that home victory, winning the German Grand Prix for Ferrari. That would have been a big deal. So maybe his off will have wider implications than just the.
Can I just say also big weekend for Ferrari with John Elkann appointed chairman of Ferrari, and Camilleri, who's also I think CEO.
Yep, CEO. So that's sort of taking the.
But I think what's significant about them is Marchionne's had very much his own ideas. He's gone into loggerheads with Liberty Media about wanting the best deal for Ferrari and not entirely committing the team to the sport in the future. He's also a huge fan of Charles Leclerc, and I know after Montreal he was very keen to get him in the car straight away and replace Kimi.
Well, this is the really interesting thing, isn't it? The impacts on the driver market. You know, the political landscape is a big deal. Because Marchionni, I think, was quite happy to hold on as long as possible.
Indeed,
and try and force kind of a no change in terms of the monies they were getting, etc. While Liberty was trying to change things. But yeah, in the immediate term, I think with Marchionni still there, Raikkonen is out, but suddenly this change around changes things completely, and suddenly Raikkonen might be thinking, do you know what? I've probably got a good chance of staying on again now, and Leclerc might have to wait. Yeah,
because there was talk over the weekend is Kimi could get reprieve with Sauber because of the Alfa Romeo investment and connection there, and but the question is, has the deal already been done with Leclerc? So we don't know.
Well, I think ultimately they've got him under lock and key anyway, so it's kind of down to them what they decide to do. So I think. I don't think they'd have had to lock into anything. So, you know, he'll be, if he's not in a Ferrari, he'll still be in a Sauber and looking to a longer-term Ferrari future.
There was a lot of chatter over the weekend and speculation, silly season, and it would be inappropriate to go into everything because things aren't locked down and we don't know for sure exactly. It's very difficult to say who's going where. But I must say, looking at the grid, we've got things that are pretty certain now, which is that Bottas has been given an extension for another year at Mercedes, hasn't he?
So he's got a new 1+1 deal, so he's in for next year with an option for 2020.
And Lewis has been confirmed now up until 2020 with Mercedes on a
2-year deal,
on a reported £40 million deal. And then, so the questions immediately went to Dan Ricciardo, and even though his deal hasn't been done yet, it's pretty certain, I think, that the two Red Bull guys are going to stay.
What's he going to do? Go to McLaren?
And then, but looking at every other team, we've just talked about Ferrari, but looking at every other team, there could be some change of some sort. And
there's all sorts of possibilities, aren't there? It emerged at Lance Stroll looking at maybe Force India. There could even be a Stroll-Robert Kubica alliance at Force India. That's one option, but there's many other things that could happen. We've got...
What does it mean for Carlos Sainz?
Carlos Sainz, could he go to McLaren? Does he get a new Renault deal? Does Esteban Ocon go to Renault because Renault want a French driver?
Yep.
Does Stoffel Van Dorn stay at McLaren, or does he go somewhere else? Could he go to Sauber? There's all of these things in the driver market, and it's
really in flux at the moment.
Exactly. People always like to say, oh, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. There's lots of compelling reasons why certain things are going to happen, but it's like a house of cards in reverse building up the driver market, in that it can easily collapse and you can have knock-on effects, just like something utterly unrelated to what's going on track has potentially changed the course of Raikkonen and Leclerc's careers. Then something else could derail all sorts of drivers. So if you're someone like Sainz, is a great example, he's probably sitting there thinking, well, I could end up with a longer-term Renault deal in an emerging works team. Great. I could end up, maybe if Ricciardo doesn't complete the deal, that he will, but there's a tiny chance that he could end up in the main Red Bull team. If Renault don't want him and he can't do a McLaren deal, there's a reasonable chance of that, or he can't get in somewhere like Sauber also would appeal a little bit. Then Red Bull might say, well, we'll give you a new deal, but I'm afraid we're going to part you with Toro Rosso, where I know you don't want to go, but if that's Sainz's only port in the storm, he'll go back to Toro Rosso. So Sainz is sat in there thinking, I could be in 5 teams, or I could be sat on the outside going, what am I doing? It's amazing. It must be difficult for the drivers to be in that situation, and people will be chasing the drivers with a funding. So obviously Stroll appeals to people. Sergio Perez has got good backing and combines that with being a very, very accomplished driver. What are Haas going to do? Magnussen should be there next year. Roman Grosjean, a good weekend performance. So 2 of the last 3 races have been strong for him, and Haas are thinking, well, we'd like to keep him because he's been a big part of the team,
and yet
people are going to be knocking on the door at Haas, and again, someone like Perez, that all these, they're all just sort of rotating around all the different teams, sort of bouncing around different destinations in the paddock. And until you've got your signature on a contract, you just don't know what's going to happen.
Don't know what's going to happen. It's manna for heaven for us, though, isn't it? Because we love a bit of intrigue and we love the gossip.
Everyone loves the driver market, but for now, the immediate attention will be on the Hungarian Grand Prix coming up this weekend. So thanks very much, James Roberts, for your insight into Lewis Hamilton's, I think it was described as a miracle victory. Miracles do happen. Pete Bonington told
They
him
do.
over the radio.
I think he said before the race, or he said after the race, that he gave a very deep, long prayer for today. But I've got to say that in the immediate aftermath of the race, when the heavens opened and the thunder struck and the paddock was flooded, it was unbelievable. It was biblical in terms of the storm. So I think the German rain gods weren't happy that Sebastian Vettel had crashed out. But for Lewis's gods, they completely delivered.
Exactly. And I think it's going to be very, very different in Budapest, because we don't often get rain there. We have occasionally had wet races. I remember there was one year when there was a massive storm not long after the race in the paddock and everything went dark. That was spectacular. So thanks very much, James Roberts. Everyone keep an eye on Autosport.com. We've got all the fallout from the German Grand Prix and the news and the latest in the build-up to the Hungarian Grand Prix this weekend. Obviously, we'll have all the coverage there over the 3 days of that event. Autosport magazine out Thursday with the in-depth race analysis and all sorts of features about the whole world of motorsport. Our Plus subscriber area online, in-depth columns. You can do our driver ratings, where you can not only see what ratings I give the drivers based on my analysis, but also you can disagree with me strenuously and vote for your own ratings. We track the reader ratings over the season as well.
And don't forget, the latest issue of F1 Racing has hit the shelves.
I would never forget that. Remind me again what's on the cover? Dan
Ricciardo's on the cover. Red Bull, can he be a champion with this team? Is this the place for him to stay and to go and to forge his future success? Buy it now.
Yep, so check that out. So pick up your copy of F1 Racing, Autosport, check out autosport.com, check out sister site motorsport.com as well. Loads to read there for all of your motorsport news for F1 and the whole world of racing. So thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back soon with another Autosport podcast. Music is 6am by Trilo, written by Marcus Simmons. See soundcloud.com/Trilo Music.